Universal Audio have been one of the leaders within the audio interface space, introducing the original Apollo all the way back in 2012. And here we are 10 years later, the brand has a new lineup of interfaces for creators making music at home or on the road, and we're here to tell you about it. The Universal Audio Volt interface lineup finds the storied Pro Audio brand making its entrance into the sub-$500 price range with seriously impressive results. These interfaces feature a retro-inspired industrial design and have been specifically created for singer-songwriters, guitarists, podcasters, content creators, and producers in mind. So in total, we have 5 different members of the Volt lineup. The Volt 1, Volt 2, Volt 176, Volt 276, and Volt 476. Each of these interfaces offer best-in-class audio quality, USB connectivity, a full site of audio software for creating on Mac and PC, and of course, last but not least, the beloved Universal Audio mic pre's that feature a vintage mic pre mode. This vintage mic preamp mode features a simple design for engaging the classic characteristic of a vintage Universal Audio 610 mic preamp. So now there's probably a few of you asking, Dustin, what's the deal with the 76 at the end of a couple of those interface names? I am so glad you asked. The Volt 176, Volt 276, and Volt 476 all have a built-in analog compressor based on the beloved, say it with me now, 1176. What? Using the simple one-button control, you can switch between presets based on your source, including voice, guitar, and fast. All right, friends. Enough with the funny stuff. We're ready to get down to business. We have the Volt 276 in the house today. And while we are making this thing here in the confines of our studio, the idea behind the Volt is that it's bus powered. You can take it anywhere. You can even power it with an iPhone or an iPad if that's your thing. We're attacking this demo from the ground up. We have Ruhala and Emily Parish today in the studio. We'll be tracking a lot of the sources going direct into the DI combo jack of the Volt, and then anything else we're going to be using a Warm Audio FET47 Junior. Jake Halkey's engineering the session today. We'll have a listen to each individual source, building it up to the final track at the end. It's going to sound dope. You're going to want to sing along and dance along. It's going to inspire you to make beautiful music and sound amazing because you're going to do it on the Universal Audio Volt. Here we go.
So the approach for today's session was to keep everything super simple. I just wanted to be able to bring my laptop and the Volt and record all the instruments through it, utilizing the hardware that's on it, the 76 compressor, as well as the vintage mic pre. We also, when it came time to mix, used all of the plugins that's included with it. We individually tracked everything and just built up the mix from there. So without further ado, let's dive in and listen to these individual tracks. So to lay the foundation for today's session, Ian brought in a drum sample loop from Hunter West, really great and punchy, dry sounding drums. On the mix, we didn't have to do too much. We added saturation from Soft Tube, just pretty much at the 50% and the low setting, just to kind of give it a little bit of bite, a little bit of crunch on the high end. Up next, we added a stock Logic EQ. Just kind of listened for any frequencies that we wanted to boost or cut to give the drums a little bit more life. Lastly, we added the Drummer S73 on the drum bus. This is a pretty cool plugin. It's got 10 different styles to choose from, each pretty unique sounding, and then just the amount you want of that style and a wet-dry mix and obviously an output gain. We went with the wide mix setting to kind of increase the depth of the drums overall. So here's what it all sounds like together. So our second source is Ian's Hofner bass. We utilized the DI input on the Volt. We had the preset for vintage and used the fast setting on the 76 compressor. And that sounded really great. It kind of held it together in the mix and also smoothed it all out. And when it came time to mix, the Volt comes with the Ampeg SVT Classic plugin, which is a tried and true on any bass source. Really kind of added more compression and rounded out the sound. And then at the very end, we added just a little bit of stock EQ to cut the lows, let the kick drum come through a little bit, and raise the highs just so it could poke through, but nothing crazy. And for this particular source, we recorded it 3 different ways to kind of showcase the different settings here. We recorded it completely raw with no compressor or vintage switch engaged, and then once with the vintage switch engaged, and then once with the vintage switch and the fast compressor engaged. on to guitars. We had Ian play his Jazzmaster directly plugged in to the Volt. Last chorus has two parts kind of playing off of each other. It's these arpeggiating, jangly parts. For one of them, we recorded it completely raw with no settings, hardware settings on it. And then the other one, we recorded it with the fast compressor and the vintage pre, just to kind of tame the highs and harshness and let it sit better in the mix. So when we went to mix the two guitar parts, we used pretty much the same plugins on both parts. We used the LX480 by Relab Development, which is pretty much a Lexicon 480 clone. Great sounding plugin, actually. It's one of those plugins where you can just pick a setting and adjust the mix knob, and you're just good to go, which I really like that. And then this tube delay by Softtube. Cool delay, but really cool saturator, actually. I found myself using it more for the saturation purposes, the tube purposes, rather than the delay. Not to say that it's not a great delay. And then at the very end, we used Logic's Direction Mixer, which is a stereo imaging mixer versus a volume panning. So they're panned pretty much hard left and right, and that's what they sound like together. So under those two jangly guitar parts, there's this rhythmic stabby riff. We recorded it pretty clean into the Volt using no hardware presetting because we knew we were going to go into this Marshall Plexi plugin. So that obviously gives it some hair. And then we went through the LX480 reverb just to give it a little bit more dimension and let it sit in the mix. And here's what it sounds like. The last electric guitar bit we recorded was Ian's solo at the end of the song. We recorded that going DI'd into the Volt with the vintage setting and the vocal compressor, which kind of gives it a little bit more openness. It doesn't really clamp down on it as hard, so it's perfect for a solo. And then to mix it, I utilized the tube delays saturation that I was talking about. So that's like the whole tone of this part, really just kind of nasty and garagey almost. And then we ran it through the LX480 for the reverb. It's a solo, got to have some reverb. And then the Drummer S73 for just to kind of tame it all so it wasn't as pokey. We put the punch setting on to give it a little bit more impact, and this is what it sounds like. So up until this point, all of our sources have been recorded directly using the combo jacks on the front of the Volt and the different presettings, as well as the amp simulating plugins that come with it. But now we're going to start miking some stuff, starting with acoustic guitar. Like the two electric guitar parts that we have at the end of the song, we also have two acoustic parts. One that we recorded completely raw with no hardware settings on the Volts, and then the other one that we recorded with the 76 fast compressor, as well as the vintage setting on the pre. And that was my favorite source, I think, that we recorded. The 76 and the vintage on the acoustic just sounds great. It already mixed itself. Because they pretty much sounded great coming in, we didn't have to do much. We just did a roll-off on a stock Logic EQ. We hit it with the Drummer S73 on the Clarity 2 setting to just kind of open it up a little bit more. And then the LX480 to just let it sit in the space and in the song. Very low mix, 10% mix, but here's what it sounds like. So for Emily's lead vocals, we use the vintage pre and then the vocal setting on the compressor. Great for, obviously, vocals. It leaves them open. It doesn't really clamp down on them. We also did harmonies as well as doubling. The doubling we recorded the same way with the vintage and the vocal compressor, but the harmonies we used the fast compressor to just kind of let them sit in the mix more and not overshadow the lead. Emily's a great singer. Other than that, we really only needed to use reverb as a plugin, and then all of the vocals went through the Drummer S73 on the more air setting just to kind of lift them up a little bit in the mix. And here's what it sounds like.
You can not calm me down. You can not calm me down. You can not calm me out. You can not calm me down.
So that wraps it up for our primary sources. Lastly, we added some percussion and shaker elements that we recorded here at the studio, and we used Spitfire Labs library to record some software percussion as well. That comes stock with the UA Volt, and you'll hear all that in the mix. So utilizing all these stock plugins that come with the Volt made mixing the song really fun, easy, and immediate. I was only really concerned with panning and volume blending, as well as doing some automation to give the song some life. And on the bridge section, we stripped away some of the instruments and added some filtering to just kind of make it dynamically smaller and softer before it gets louder on the final chorus. And that's about it on the mix. I really had a blast using the Volt today with its 610 vintage inspired mic pre's and its 1176 inspired compressor, as well as the myriad of plugins that are included with it. It really does set you up to be efficient in this hybrid workflow that we've all grown accustomed to today. Without any further ado, here's the mix. Hope you enjoy it.
Mindset on the street, uncontrollable laughter. Cross my legs and feet, and my eyes will be after. So sick, and what's the point? You can't beat it, just join in. So weird, about to bust out of here. You can not calm me down. You can not calm me down. You can not calm me out. You can not calm me down.
All right, friends, there you have it, the Universal Audio Volt family of interfaces. If you have any questions about the Volt, anything else from Universal Audio, feel free to hit up your audio consultant, visit us at vintageking.com, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.